Okay. And then I'm going to hit present. Let's see. All right. You should see on the screen where it says Chapter 1, We the People, the American People Today. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Right. All right. So like I said, this is the last section on the chapter. And it's just basically kind of going over kind of the makeup of who we are in America right now, and kind of how it's going to kind of play out on when we talk about kind of like politics and voting and stuff like that. So what essentially this section is dealing with is what we would classify as demographics. All right, which is, like it says there, the study of the characteristics of human populations. All right. And so demographics covers everything from basically how many people are not just in America, but also in states, counties, cities, all that other stuff. Right. A big part of like how we determine the number of the population is a census. Which this year is a census year. So a census is basically an official counting of population taken every 10 years with the numbers that end in 0, right? So your house may have gotten in the mail like basically these reminders to fill out the census. It's something that you're supposed to do. All right. Now, I don't know. At times it's, they'll try to basically kind of get an accurate count here. Not everybody will probably reply to the census, but you're supposed to, right? And so after the last census of 2010, I believe the population of the United States was 300 million, a little over 300 million. I think the guesstimation right now is about it'll probably be about 331 million people in the United States. All right. The United States is the 3rd largest country based on population in the world. First two being China, then India. And there's a big difference between those two and the United States. Both of those populations have over 1 billion people. All right. But also with demographics, we talk about essentially the kind of ethnic makeup, age, all these varied demographics just mean basically all these ways to kind of identify people who lives in America. All right. And the purpose is with the census also is determining, particularly with states, the representation in the House of Representatives. All right. And so states like Illinois have been losing population over kind of since probably we're talking about the 80s. And so Illinois loses 1 to 2 representatives like every kind of 10 years. And other states, and we'll talk about a little bit like the difference between Sun Belt and Rust Belt, gain like California, Texas, places like that. All right. So as far as like, and you can like have these demographics basically outlined into a map. This is a population density map, which shows the kind of the average number of people living per square mile. And so you'll see like places like what they call like the kind of megalopolis of Boston through New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. That's a heavy concentration of people in that area. All right. Chicago, obviously up there, California with Los Angeles and San Diego and San Francisco. See, right, we're kind of like in this area right here, St. Clair, Madison County, like has a relatively high population. All right. Now, let's see. Hold on. I'm sorry about that. I'll go about that. So in white here, you'll see there's a lot of kind of lower population density in places where you have a lot of space, but not a whole lot of people. All right. And there's various factors on why people are kind of in these larger urban areas. All right. Initially, that was mainly related to industrialization. All right. And so in the kind of like the growth of this country as the population has kind of have grown over the years, how does populations grow, essentially, not just the United States but other countries as well. One is a general natural increase, as they call, where we see the birth rate should be greater than the death rate. Now, these two terms, birth rate and death rate, are pretty easy to understand. Birth rate is the annual number of live births, those who survive past infancy, per 1,000 members of population, and then death rate is the annual number of deaths per 1,000 members. So I think the birth rate in the United States is like 0.75, I think, maybe. So what generally you'll find is, well, the United States being an industrial country, one part of the first world, if you will, you'll find a relative natural increase. In other parts of the world, what they call the third world, very poor countries, a lot of times you'll see either a birth rate or death rate kind of like surpass each other greatly. All right. And so a lot of countries like in Western Europe, Japan, Australia, you'll see kind of a relative natural increase. There's certain countries, though, like in places like Italy, where we see a decrease, all right, because the birth rate has gotten lower. Japan is the same way, actually, just recently. All right. And so as a result there, you're going to have to kind of help an older population and try to maintain certain social services. You need to have people come into that country. All right. So this here, and like I said, in the United States right now, we are going to have a slight natural increase where the birth rate slightly surpasses the death rate. But you don't want either one to kind of be out of whack with one another. All right. And another factor, which is part of kind of the U.S. kind of history here, is adding new territory. The U.S. over the years, from its founding as a republic, geographically has been expanding. We had talked about kind of in U.S. history, we talk about like westward expansion, right? The idea of annexing, taking over new lands and people. The kind of the American history, starting with things like the purchase of the Northwest Territory, the Louisiana Purchase. Those things were kind of been negotiated. We also had wars like with the Mexican-American War, where we gained like most of Texas, California, Arizona, a lot of the states in the American Southwest. All right. But then also kind of adding territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, through warfare as well. All right. So adding new territories, it obviously increases the population. All right. And then immigration. Like I said, we had talked about it in Section 2. We're a nation of immigrants. Right? We have about 60 million immigrants since 1820. We encouraged immigration during the time of kind of rapid industrialization. And we had talked about how that immigration kind of shapes demographics in that sense, where we see this sometimes a pushback on immigration at times with certain acts in Congress. But without immigration, we wouldn't have been the industrial power and essentially the power that we are today. All right. So these are three ways that you kind of gain in population. All right. Like I said, the third one is something like we haven't really added new territories in a while, probably since the 20th century. All right. But immigration is the one that tends to get a lot of focus on there. All right. And we had talked a little bit about kind of DACA and things of that nature. All right. So this is one of those questions, all the following except kind of questions. All right. Now, changes in population just recently, probably from the last census, is one, the population is getting older. We see generations, like you guys, I believe, are you guys Generation Z? I think you guys are Generation Z. You see various kind of generations that at certain times we see kind of like booms in birth. Like the older population, like your grandparents, are part of the baby boom generation, which a lot of your parents probably after our grandparents, after World War II, you had a lot of returning GIs, and there was a kind of bit of a population boom there. A lot of these people are getting close to getting Social Security and stuff like that. So we do see there's a need for kind of social services for a number of those older generations there. Population becoming more ethnically diverse. We do see this here where we see, and I'm going to show you this Vox video here that talks about that, whereby I believe it's like 2045, 2050, Caucasian white Americans will not be a majority. We'll see kind of a mixing here. Matter of fact, African Americans, who were the largest minority, the last census, Hispanics, Latinx surpassed African Americans. Households are getting smaller. By that meaning, we don't see as larger families as we had in the past. That trend has been probably since the 60s and 70s, right? But there were in the past you had like large families that were pretty common. Now more kind of 2 to 3 kids, right, which seems to be the kind of the average, and then more women as heads of household, as more women. And this again trend kind of starting in the 70s are becoming, in many cases, breadwinners, as they say. They're coming into the workforce and kind of getting jobs that had been traditionally for men, but still women aren't as paid equally in many cases. I think it's like 70 cents to the dollar for men. So these are some of the population changes that have been occurring a lot over time. But like the population becoming, I think, diverse since the last one, we see a definite kind of shift in there. All right. So just briefly, I'm going to play this. I need to mute my mic. I'm going to play this Vox video that kind of talks about how we see this kind of demographic change when it comes to ethnicity. All right. And so let me mute my mic.
How a more diverse America makes you feel is the core division in our political and cultural fights right now. But to see why, you need to know how we're changing and how a changing country changes us. Here's the big picture. The US is at a demographic tipping point, a genuinely historic moment. 2013, it was the first year that the majority of US infants under the age of 1 were non-white. By 2016, white deaths had outnumbered white births, but America's overall population, it's not expected to decrease. And that's because the Black, Asian, and especially Latino and mixed race populations, they're also growing. They're growing fast. By 2045, the Census Bureau projects that non-Hispanic whites will no longer be a majority, and also that foreign-born residents are going to make up a record share of the population. So when you show people these numbers about how America is changing, what goes through their heads? What is their response?
I think people are hearing these changes as somehow a fundamental remaking of what America is. At least a lot of people are hearing it, and some of them are excited about it and some of them are not so excited. We see on average white Americans, when they read about this majority-minority shift, becoming more politically conservative.
Jennifer Richardson is a psychologist who studies how people react to demographic change. She won a MacArthur Genius Grant for this work. And what she's found helps explain a lot of what we're seeing. For instance, when white political independents who live in the West were told that whites were no longer majority in California, they became 11 percentage points more likely to support the Republican Party. That is a huge change. And it's important to say, this is a human reaction to demographic change, not just a white one. When presented with similar data on the growing numbers of Hispanics, Asian Americans shifted towards more conservative views. Black Americans shifted towards more conservative views. Being told your group is shrinking or that it's losing power, it's scary for anyone.
Losing numbers are associated with losing status, losing power, losing currency in the culture.
There are a lot of studies like these, but the one I find myself thinking about the most was done by Harvard's Ryan Enos.
What we did is we sent these 2 Spanish speakers out to catch a train at a certain time every day over a period of days. We'd sent out research assistants and they surveyed these people waiting on the train. And that little exposure was enough to move these attitudes in this survey. They're more likely to say we should send those children of immigrants back to Mexico. They're more likely to say we should decrease immigration from Mexico. And they're even more likely to endorse that English should be the official language of the United States.
We saw a version of this in the election then too, right?
So in states, and even in small areas in states, in these counties, where the Spanish population changed very rapidly, we saw that these voters had moved towards supporting Donald Trump. And a lot of them actually looked like they're these people that previously had been Democrats.
So here then is what we know. Even gentle, unconscious exposure to reminders that America is diversifying, and particularly to the idea that America is becoming a majority-minority nation, it pushes folks towards more conservative policy opinions, towards more support of the Republican Party. So what happens when those reminders aren't gentle?
Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like.
Our Christian heritage will be cherished, protected, defended like you've never seen before.
When Obama was elected in 2008, there was all this talk of America moving into a post-racial moment. But the mere existence of Obama's presidency made a lot more of politics about how you felt about race. It had this effect on healthcare, the stimulus package, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party. Hell, it even had this effect on how people felt about Obama's dog.
So the dog is kind of a fun experiment on a serious topic. Both Teddy Kennedy, a well-known liberal Democrat, and Barack Obama have the same dog. Their two dogs are actually related, Portuguese water dogs. So let's see how people respond to these dogs when you tell one that it's Ted Kennedy and one that it is Barack Obama's. What happens is that when you tell people it's Barack Obama's, racial liberals like the dog more, racial conservatives like the dog less. Obama polarizes more because of who he is rather than what he says and does. And so Obama goes through great lengths in both campaigns to try to tamp down racial divisions, to not talk about race. When he does talk about race, he does so in a message of personal responsibility.
And there was something real here. A few decades ago, a multiracial voter base, it couldn't drive American politics like it can now. Obama won in 2012 with only 39% of the white vote. Previous Democratic candidates, they lost elections in big ways with a lot more support by whites. But by 2016, Trump also proved that a candidate who was explicitly talking to white fears about race could win.
The Republicans now have a temptation to explicitly appeal to race. And you're seeing this throughout Republican primaries in the 2018 cycle. And you're seeing it the reverse on the Democratic side. Abolish ICE is a good example. That is a policy that Democrats would not have been on board with in the 1990s, but their bases have moved, and so the incentives have moved as well.
Now, to say American politics is in for turbulence is not to say we're in for dissolution or civil war. California went through these changes. It experienced this demographic shift, and it didn't fall to pieces. But leading up to that, there was a lot of friction. Voters passed racially charged propositions targeting undocumented immigrants. They banned affirmative action. They restricted bilingual education.
But we also know, right, there are states that have large populations of racial minorities, largely Black Americans, but they're growing in Latinos that are incredibly unequal in every way, right? So the question is, we want to think, oh, it'll work out, look at California, but it could also work out and be Mississippi.
As the browning of America continues, this cycle of hope about the future activating fears about the present, it's just going to keep going. In that, politicians who can articulate a vision of this future that is inclusive and inspiring and non-threatening, that very mixture Obama sought in 2008, they could reap massive rewards. But as long as much of the country feels threatened by the changes they see, there's also going to be a continuing, and maybe even a growing, market for politicians like Donald Trump.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so that I just kind of showed that video to kind of talk about how like demographic shifting in that do have a role in kind of politics. All right, and again, like I said, this is an election year, so we'll be talking about the presidential election quite frequently. All right. Another thing with demographics that we see kind of as kind of time goes on, probably since the 70s here, is that we see a more mobile society. We see people kind of moving from region to region, what we would call migration. All right. And so migration is usually generally within a kind of like a kind of a country. And we see this kind of moving around. So early on in the Republic, we saw more rural areas. We were an agrarian society. All right. And so we talk, small towns, farming communities, which we still have, but we see starting around the beginning of the kind of late part of the 19th and the 20th century, we start to see larger urban areas. All right. When they use the term urban, they just generally mean cities, large cities. All right. So St. Louis obviously would be our urban area around here. All right. And so as we see kind of kind of industrialization occur. We see more and more cities that have factories that are attracting more people that in many cases leave rural areas, but also through immigration. We see pockets of kind of ethnic enclaves in certain parts. Like if you ever go to Chicago, you'll see like Chicago, it definitely still has that kind of like you have an area that is largely kind of like Polish and an area that large Mexican area, Korean, you know, so you see these pockets of like kind of like Chinatowns in places like New York City are a prime example of that. All right. So anytime you see the term urban, that means cities. All right. And then probably after World War II, we start to see the rise of suburbs, all right, areas that were surrounding outside major cities. This also coincided with the building of interstate highways, all right, in the 1950s. So we see like metropolitan areas start to emerge. Like we are part of the St. Louis metropolitan area. Collinsville would be classified as a suburb of St. Louis. All right. And so also what we start to see here is that people shifting, kind of moving from place to place is going to affect populations from certain areas. So it's starting probably after World War II, we start to see kind of in particularly the 60s and 70s, but heightened in the 90s, and that we start to see two regions that are kind of going on a kind of opposite trajectories. All right. So one region referred to as the Sun Belt, which is basically the American South and West. All right. So places like Florida, Texas, Arizona, California would all be classified as part of the Sun Belt. All right, there we start to see populations increasing as we start to see kind of our economy move to one that's more service industry rather than industrial. All right, places like, for example, California, like with the development of computers, Silicon Valley, all right, that kind of increases the population there in that region in California. Conversely, with the decline of industrialization and more goods being made out of the country, we start to see places like Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania that are losing populations. Those are referred to as the Rust Belt. All right, and you see those kind of states within Rust obviously gives us an indication that it's something that's like kind of dying out to a certain extent. So as a result, with the census, you'll see states like California and Texas and Florida gain populations. Therefore, they'll gain representation in Congress. And places like Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio will lose 1 to 2 representatives after the census. All right. So there's a question on the test, like all the following states are part of the Sun Belt or all the following states are part of the Rust Belt. All right. So just like be aware of that. All right. So that's about it. That's chapter 1. All right. So let's see. All right. So stop presenting. So do you guys know that are you guys aware on Tuesday we're going back to the hybrid model? So those you guys who are okay, so A through L, those you guys will be, if you signed up for that, you guys will be in class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. M through Z, you guys will be on Wednesdays and Fridays. So my plan is to test over this chapter by next Friday. Not tomorrow, obviously, but the Friday after. All right.
We're going back to hybrid?
Yeah, we're going back to the hybrid. Yeah. So I think there should have been something mailed out to you guys today that will inform that. Now, if you pick full remote, you can still stay full remote. All right. And I'll basically record lectures and send stuff out in the afternoon. So, but we'll do a review. I'll send out a review before the test. All right. So, and the test will basically be open notes. All right. So, does anybody have any questions, any concerns? All right. Sounds good. Okay. I'm not going to send out anything tomorrow. Monday, obviously, is Labor Day. All right. So, if you didn't get a chance to get on the Newsella article from yesterday, you'll have some time to do that. All right. So, those of you guys who are doing the hybrid, I'll see you guys next week. Those of you guys who are doing full remote, you'll get some stuff from me. I'll send stuff out to you. Okay. And as always, shoot me an email if you got any questions or concerns. Sounds good, guy? Sound good?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good
Have a
weekend.
good day.
Okay.
You too.
All right. Take care.